Hi, everybody. It's Nick here. Chad and Nate, welcome to the first of several hands-on training sessions with particles that are happening on Thursday. Just wanted to check in, if you don't mind, tuning into the chat and just letting us know where you're from, as well as that you can hear and see us okay. We also have Simon Walker in the background as well. Hello, Simon.
I'm skulking, answering some questions and stuff. Hey, everyone.
Lurking.
Lurking. Denver, Louisville, Mexico City, Chicago. Wow, this is great.
I think it's Louisville. I think that's how
Is it Louisville?
I think it's
Louisville.
Louisville. Yeah.
Louisville. Okay.
Yeah. People from there would say Louisville. I think the rest of the country says Louisville, but people have been there. Like, no, it's Louisville.
I knew some. I learned something new today myself. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been corrected. I've been reprimanded before.
Okay. This is like perfect. Awesome. Great. Well, it's so great for you guys to all join us, and it's also just awesome to see that everyone has traveled from, well, is just tuning in from far and wide. This is great. And I'm just going to actually just turn to my screen here. So let me do some screen sharing. I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping and then get on to the good stuff. So let me load myself up here, make myself organizer. Everyone sees my screen okay?
I don't see it yet.
I'm not seeing it.
Okay, so I got a
There
little.
we go.
Oh, that's just you guys. Now, do you guys see the web page okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So the first thing I wanted to let you guys know is that there's a ton of events happening at Maxon. You guys are tuning in right now to the hands-on particle series. This is the first, so I would say almost one of the most special parts of the series where we're going to be introducing particular. And we're also joined by the fabulous Nate Haight here, who's the product manager of Trapcode. So thank you so much for joining us and willing to take some of the questions about this fantastic plugin.
Yeah, happy to do it.
And of course, we're also joined by Chad Perkins, who, to let alone, has been an After Effects instructor for a number of years, not to mention worked with Red Giant and Maxon. And it's just great to be presenting with you, man.
You too, bud.
I remember I was telling Chad a story the other day. Maybe 15 years ago, I picked up an After Effects book at NAB, probably about 10 years ago, and it had your name on it. So it's kind of cool to be presenting with you here, man.
I went through with a Sharpie at NAB and I just kind of like wrote my name on all the books.
Oh, you just did. That's why it was all in pencil.
Yeah.
The other was crossed out. Yeah.
It's like, wow, Chad Perkins co-authored every book here.
busy guy.
It's so cool, but it's so great to be here with you. And
you too, man. Thanks.
And I should mention that besides this hands-on particle series, there also happens to be a Cinema 4D hands-on series as well. That's happening on Wednesdays, and I believe you can find out the information here about that on the Maxon event page. Now, in terms of today's session, we actually have some exercise files for you, and I just want to make sure that everyone is going to be able to find them. So from the events page, I'm just going to click on here, which leads just to a little bit of a description of what we're going to be getting into over the next 6 weeks. It follows a bit of a different pace than the demystifying series, because we are assuming that you guys are going to be following along with us on your own systems and hopefully learning just a ton about particles. But if you head to the bottom of this event page, you'll notice that you can download the project files from here and also a full course outline. So I'm going to click on this just to lead there. Here's the Dropbox folder. And in the meantime, also copy this for you guys and place this in the chat if you need to access it. And hopefully you'll be able to see that right now. Cool. Besides that, we are recording this session, and it's not going to be a public link. So I also want to share with you guys that there is a private, unlisted YouTube section of the Maxon training site. And if you want to access the recording, I would say a couple hours after the session, you'd be able to do so here at this link. And on top of that, don't forget to subscribe to the Maxon training team regular website, where you'll get a lot more stuff besides the hands-on 20-second tips, some that I do and some that Simon does, as well as just a whole bunch of other resources here, which is incredible. Not to mention the little trailer that Chad put together for this hands-on training that you should totally check out.
Ridiculous.
It was
Awesome.
pretty fun.
That was a pretty fun trailer to do, that's for sure. Cool. So now that I've covered that information, I always, in a hands-on class, like to just go through a bit of housekeeping before we start to ask Nate some questions just about Trapcode in general. And that is that I will be showing examples in After Effects 2021. So just to note, I'm on the latest version of After Effects, and I'm also on the latest version of Red Giant's Trapcode Suite. So there are, from the website, links to actually get a trial version if you don't have one, but you would want to have After Effects as well as the Trapcode Suite installed on your system in order to follow along with us and go through some of the exercise files that we shared with you. And this is also just a great time, and I'll try to repeat this because we're going to have a general discussion in case anyone needs to get set up for this. Feel free to start downloading After Effects as well as Trapcode Suite in the background if you need it, and let us know if you have any problems finding access to the free trial version if it's not available to you. And without further ado, Nate, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do at Maxon.
Yeah. So I am the product manager for Trapcode. So I basically I take input from talented artists and hand it over to talented engineers, and they make the products for the artists. So I'm just kind of a conduit, kind of steering the ship. That's what I do now. My background actually originally came from electronics repair background. Worked for the Department of Defense repairing electronics for the Army, like night vision goggles and chemical detectors and whatnot. But I started to find that I had a passion and interest in filmmaking. So I eventually decided to take the leap, go back to school. I went to the Art Institute and got my degree in visual effects and motion graphics. And Red Giant was an entity that was around. I was very familiar with them and Trapcode. So an opportunity came up after I got out of school to get my foot in the door with customer support, and that was where I started out about 5 years ago. And from there, my troubleshooting background came into play. I moved into QA, quality assurance. So I was the lead QA for Trapcode, which led me here when this opportunity arose. So
That's
that was
awesome.
my path. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. And Nate, I was just curious, when QA is discussed in terms of a product like Trapcode Suite, like what is some of your like day-to-day, what did that entail in terms of the product? And also,
Yeah.
I would say, and I think Chad would agree, that we've seen so much change from Trapcode Suite over the last few years with the designer and then having multiple particle systems. So I'm really curious how that falls into it as well.
Yeah, so on the day-to-day, during development cycles, I would be involved in testing regular builds. We'd be adding features, and those would come to me in a build, and I run through and make sure that they're working or not. And running through the matrices, making sure that everything is still working on all of the different systems that we support. I would also consult with customer issues that come in through CST, Those honestly are usually kind of my favorite thing, because by the time it comes in, it's like a mystery. There's something really odd. By the time CST hands it off to me, they're like, "This, I have no idea what's going on here." And so I get somebody's project file and I get to start poking through it. And like, that is really weird. Why is this doing this? Oh, okay, now I see what's going on. It's kind of like detective work that was really enjoyable.
That's that must be really interesting too. I've had my share file like with actual project files from students, particularly in classes and stuff like that, and it's always interesting to get to what is that bottleneck that could be causing a user a problem, and
Right.
it always amazes me sometimes the simplicity of it, and then other times the non-simplicity of to get to that actual answer.
Oh yeah, yeah,
like figuring out like, oh, what went wrong, because there's so many variables that are at play. Yeah.
Well, and to see how different people use the tools is like, I'd never even thought about implementing it in that way. I could see how you could get there. So it's educational too.
Cool. And so now that you're project manager of Trapcode, and I was curious if you could speak towards Trapcode particular, and what do you love about the product?
I mean, I love how complex it is and vast, like just the amount of possibilities that there are with it. After all these years, I'm still discovering new ways to use it and new functions with it. But it is at the same time really approachable, that I'm comfortable poking around with things, because especially getting into the designer, and you can get immediate feedback with the things that you're touching. And I get lost in exploration of it, and often at the detriment of tasks I'm supposed to be doing. I get set to look at one specific thing, and then I'm like, well, I don't know if I added some shadowlets to that, that'd look really cool. Oh, I'm gonna emit from a 3D model now. Oh yeah, this is looking great. And then a half hour later, I'm like, oh yeah, I was supposed to be doing something else. So yeah, I mean, it's just something that you can get lost in, but it's also an incredibly powerful tool when you have a specific need, and need to create smoke effects and crowds, and like there are things within its tool set that it does really, really well.
Very cool. And just to add to that, like I agree. I've found myself with, especially where you have multiple systems, just like how much possibility it is, and what happens if you remove a block here, and then you get something completely different with the particle system.
Oh yeah.
You can experiment like for quite a long period of time. And I know, Chad, you've like experienced the same thing with projects that we've shared back and forth. Where
Yeah,
like,
it's difficult to like not like to stay on task, do the thing that I'm supposed to do. It's very yeah.
And I can imagine as somebody who makes tutorials, like once you've explored your way down this path, and now you got to think about, wait, how did I get here? Does that happen to you? Yeah.
Oh, all the time. I will have like a table of contents that's like this long, and then as I'm playing, it gets like, oh, well, I gotta show that. Oh, I should do a thing on this, and like it gets longer and longer and longer, because I'm just like, oh, that's such a fun trick. We should get into that. Yeah. Totally.
And just wanted to let everyone know, just like who's just tuning in, we're here with Nate Haight, and we're asking him some questions, the product manager of Trapcode. And if you're curious, because I know you guys all signed on for a hands-on course, we're just doing a sort of an introduction today for the first part, but I guarantee you that you're about to take a really great experience on some hands-on exercises as we go through this course, all the way from beginner type particle-based simulations to some intermediate, and even on the edge of advanced. And then we're going to continue that into the Cinema 4D ecosphere as well in weeks 5 or 6. But just wanted to preface this by saying it. I've included a couple links in the GoToWebinar control panel for you to access the exercise files. Let us know if you have problem accessing it. And I would just recommend, if you want to in the background, just feel free to give After Effects a click and start launching it. And even those exercise files, mine in particular is the one that we're going to start with. So feel free to do that in the background as we continue to chat and a little bit about particular and learning some great stuff from Nate Haight here. And I wanted to ask, so we talked a little bit about what's awesome about Trapcode Particular. What do you think is the most overlooked feature in Trapcode Particular, or overlooked features?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's tough to say. I'm not sure that I would say that there are features that are overlooked. Often, what we see is, people are familiar with the features that.
Nate has frozen.
Nate, you have
been
frozen
there forever,
Oh.
And there can tend to be a little bit of a slow adoption. Am I back?
You're back now.
You're back now. Yes.
Hello.
You were gone
We
for
had
a minute.
we had a great frame, like a freeze frame though,
okay.
of you for a bit.
All right.
You're good now.
Was I like? Oh, sorry. Anyway, so back up a little bit, I guess. I was saying that I don't necessarily know of features that get overlooked, but what we do see is sometimes a slow adoption rate of new features. So I see, like we introduced fluid dynamics like 2.5 years ago, and you're just now starting to see it become more common in people's work with Trapcode. And so that's what I often look for, because we work for months on a new release, and then we send it out into the world, and we sit there like, what are you gonna do with it? Because we're mostly technicians over here, and we know how to make the tools work, but it's really exciting to see once it gets into the hands of artists. So yeah, I would love to start seeing more use of the new air physics and flocking, and see how people can implement that. I know I had ideas of how I wanted to do it. One of the first things I did with flocking was track the target point onto a person and have a swarm of bees chase them. So I want to see how other people Seth Worley came out with that tutorial recently where he was recreating the Ghostbusters, the beam effect using flocking. It was a really creative use. It was not a typical use that you would think of for that feature, but he found a way to get that squiggly Ghostbusters beam using flocking. So those are the features that I would be interested in seeing more work from.
Now, Nate, you have a technical background. Well, I guess you went to school for visual effects and motion graphics too. But like, if you're working with, you're interfacing with engineers, like, how do you pick, what tools to make and how you make the tools? See, that's always like a fascinating thing to me, because, particular especially, I think of it like baking. You're giving people like flour and eggs and water, and there's just so much chemical power in all of those like raw ingredients. But oftentimes, like with baking, like it can be hard to know like how to combine them and what kind of magic you can make with them. So like, how do you, because it seems like that's part of your, that seems like part of your job too, where you're kind of deciding which features go in there, right?
Got a little freeze on Nate's end on my system. Do you have the same there, Chad?
I have the same, yes.
Okay. Just to add to what you were saying, or add to what Nate was saying until he comes back here. One thing that I think is kind of super cool about fluid physics too, like on the newest version of Particular, is how do you mix that now with fast physics? Because alone, for the longest time, fluid physics was its own thing, and it doesn't essentially work with other particle simulations, but it does because the last block on the chain, which we'll see when we go into the designer in a second, is the fast physics. How does that interact? Like, what can you now do with that? Because fast physics by itself is a pretty powerful item that's been in Trapcode for the longest time, and now you can mix it with fluid physics. I'd be super cool and interested to see what that would be like, Chad.
Yeah, there's so much potential for like all that stuff. I mean, when that stuff first came out, like you and I did those like super fun webinars in December, you know, if you remember that, that was fun.
I do remember that.
And we like dug into all that stuff, and like that was like our job, is like come up with examples. And so like we were like spending all this time in it, and I feel like I just barely scratched the surface, even though I was just using those features like over and over again repeatedly for like a long period of time. So yeah, it feels like I could totally understand where Nate's coming from about the slow adoption of these really cool things. Like you build these tools and you're like, look what you could do. And I feel like Trapcode DAO is like that.
I think so too. I also think it's a totally undiscovered kind of effect, and you know, in some ways not utilized as much. And besides watching your series of tutorials, Chad, on Red Giant, towards DAO, just in case. By the way, I'll have a request in the chat just to send anyone some tutorials that you like from someone, if you wanted to give a couple links. But yeah, besides seeing your DAO tutorials and then fooling with it, it's definitely less explored to me compared to particular and form in terms of particular effects. I think you'll like this. That you've been dabbling a little bit with Houdini and Cinema 4D workflows, but I started watching like a few Houdini workflows in terms of what it does with particle systems. One thing that I found really interesting was that those particle systems, when you map something to a 3D object, a lot of times you have control over specifically where particles are born on very specific geometry segments, and you can control how it moves. So one of the things that I'm hoping to share later this week is a Cinema 4D particular workflow, where instead of like bringing an OBJ Cinema 4D object, which is awesome, actually taking that OBJ and making it into a series of splines, and then wrapping lights around those splines to have a different type of projection with particular. So that's my current like little project in the background, is like the same type of thought process with like 3D models, except lights are traveling across the geometry versus like the particles being emitted from it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Let's not make me look super bad here by doing all this cool stuff.
This is like one of those we're just talking about experimenting and stuff like that. There's no.
I'm gonna show up with like, these like dumb examples. Everybody's gonna be like, just shut up and let Nick do his thing. Nick is making magic.
We had a great, by the way, question from Christiana. What's everyone's favorite dog? And I think it's very important to answer right now. My dog is Ray. It's a little Bichon poodle, so that is my favorite dog. It happens to be the one that I'm currently. We gave a haircut to today. So in the meantime, hopefully where Nate will come back here in a second, I do want to show a little bit of kind of an intro slides to particles. I think that that's a good time to sort of do it and demystify a little bit about particles across the multiple applications that you'll be using. So I have this little keynote slideshow to share with everyone if you're willing to see it. So let me do
Dude, by the way, since like Nate's not here, I love your little like slideshows. Like
thanks, man.
They always look so sexy and like cool, and I'm always like, yay. So yeah, I'm glad that I finally have like a moment of space to be like, dude, your PowerPoints are legit. They're great.
Yeah, and I will be uploading this PowerPoint / keynote to the training files at the end of this session. So I might be including some additional information, but let's just do a little bit of a demystifying of what are particles and how they fall into play across all of the multiple systems. So if we're going to talk about particles in life, that all matter, including Chad, is made of particles. And it's a lot of tiny matter that's hidden to the eye. And when we take that into motion graphics, this is what it might look like. That particles are usually going to emit from some sort of system or source. These systems take large numbers of small graphical objects and simulate real-world phenomena or structures. And these particle systems also offer unachievable or difficult of using motion graphic techniques. It's like if you were to consider, Chad, like utilizing After Effects' replicator, right? Where
the
you
shape
made
layers?
like shape layers, like where you maybe you create a star, and you decide to replicate that star in both X and Y 1,000,000 times, and then decide to animate it, your system might get bogged down a little bit. So I think Particular is fantastic about allowing for this, like taking these graphical elements and utilizing your GPU and CPU in order to not only take these graphics, but animate them and give you some great performance out of it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Moving to the next thing, here's some of the main particle attributes that you're going to see. So all particles have a size, color. When we talk about Particular, they have a lifespan, and they have a weight and a scale to them. Weight is even further expressed in Particular now, where there's a new mass value that you can adjust, which would affect the way that particles are falling based on certain physics attributes. So we'll take a look at that in a couple sessions from now. But I would say the weight of particles, or that mass, carries over through multiple particle systems. So when we talk about Particular, the whole idea is particles can emit from something. The first thing that we see is just a simple point in space, but it's being emitted from that or geometry. And with Particular, the emission happens to be 360 degrees around that particular object. So emitting in all directions versus some sort of directional or controlled emission. Whether they are or aren't emitted, physical forces can also act on particles, affecting their path of travel, their speed, and their movement inside of Particular. So when we talk about that, I think we should also introduce the idea of Trapcode Form, because I think that what Trapcode Form does really well is allows you to have access to particles that don't necessarily have a lifespan. What they do have, though, is your ability to animate properties or animate them without essentially a lot of movement being involved. And they tend to lend themselves well to things like FUI graphics, which was one of our demystifying series last month. Wouldn't you agree, Chad?
Absolutely, dude. Absolutely. I love this. Also, again, just a little shout out to your little slide here. Like it's arranged like a quote, you know. Like I feel like I'm looking at like a Maya Angelou quote or something like that. This is really great slide work. I love this.
Oh, thank you. I'm still struggling with the font, but we can talk about that later.
Sorry.
But no, that's got to get a little signature here, or maybe add the Michelangelo quote. I like that. That's yeah, so this is going into form. So the idea of particles being static, not living or dying on an object with little or no forces acting upon them. And this is something where it's like discovering like little pieces of Trapcode Suite versus just Particular. It's quite interesting because it tends to lend itself well for various replication methods we can consider it too. Like even Trapcode Stroke does a great job of replicating flat geometry in some cases, and even offers possibilities that Form in Particular don't. But that's one of those things of the idea of particles being static is you would find, I think, a better starting place in many cases with Form than you would necessarily Particular. Then we have the idea of multiple ways of thinking about particle systems in animation. So this is just an idea of trying to, okay, how does Trapcode Particular and Form work versus what would happen when you travel into Cinema 4D? So what I consider it as is Trapcode Particular and Form have all the necessary building blocks that you essentially need for your animation, right? They're all included when you go into the designer, or even all of the properties that you see in the effect controls of After Effects. But when we look at something like thinking particles, and when we get into X particles, in many cases, it's like you start off with like a simple emission, but then you start adding properties and values to it. Not all of the things that you can do to manipulate particles in terms of physics are there when you start off. In fact, you have to add these building blocks. They're all independent, and then essentially through node-based thinking or adding these elements, you can change and manipulate your particles.
Now, Nick,
so that's
this is for Cinema 4D for thinking particles, right?
Thinking particles is in Cinema 4D, but it also kind of goes over, let me not pause my screen, there we go. It also goes over some of the thought of X particles too. So like again, when we look at the designer and form, like you have all the building blocks you need and everything is in one container. Like you don't have to add anything to particular minus compositing effects. But when you go like to thinking particles, it's like you start with one node and that node does like nothing until you attach it to another node that then does the emission. And then after that, you have to add another node that does the turbulence, right? So you're adding the blocks or the building blocks to it, doesn't come all at once.
Okay.
X particles is kind of similar. Like you get, there is like an XP system, they call it, which would then parallel a particular system, right? Where we have a starting point, but then in order to, you have to add blocks like physics simulations to it in order to modify particle movement or their lifespan in a particular way. And even things like questions, which is if a particle does this, please do this. Another idea to think about it if you're using After Effects quite a bit is this is like a way of doing expressions simply by question and answer, so to speak. Nate, you're back. Sorry, I just was going through like a little bit of a particle intro until you get back to us.
So sorry about that. Yeah, I haven't had connectivity issues in months, and then of course, right in the middle of a live webinar. Such is life, eh?
Such is life.
Such is life.
No worries.
Keeping us on our toes for the first session. So yeah, we were just leading off of just doing like a demystifying of particles across all of Maxon 1 and the systems. And then the last question we were chatting about was like overlooked parts of Trapcode particular. I was adding to the fact that I love fluid simulations as well. And now the fact that fast physics can be added to that, like because fluids was kind of its own thing, but now having fast physics that can be integrated with it, I think is so cool. So I'm curious to see how that is going to allow for more options with particle systems.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The last thing I heard Chad was asking how we come up with the new features. Is that?
Yeah, like how do you determine, like how are technicians able to create such great raw materials for artists to play with?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a collaboration. We have a lot of people on our team who are very talented artists. We have Hashi and Harry Frank, and we take input from customers and our user base. We take all of these things and kind of put them together. And so when we're getting ready to plan out the next development cycle, we kind of do a brainstorming session and say, hey, here's some things that we're looking at as possibilities. How could this work out? We do the whiteboard thing and the bubbles and how would this work, and how do these things kind of come together to form a release? And often the ideas come from the engineers as well, because they're the ones that really know the capabilities, or they've been looking off at some technology like, hey, what if we integrated this? And that was the case with fluids, and our lead engineer. He had been kind of looking into this possibility and was the one that introduced the idea to us. We're like, yeah, okay, let's see what we can do with this. So it is very much a collaboration amongst different minds.
I'm fascinated by that process. A few years ago, I wrote the user guides for the Trapcode Suite. And during that process, so I started before the release, and I was like there for the beta stuff. And I don't want to like say too much, but like they would come out and be like, oh, we've decided to add this new feature in, and like launches in like a couple months. It's like huge new feature that's going to overhaul everything. And like within just like, it felt like a matter of days, there was this like unbelievable feature that like worked so well. I don't know if you have like legions of developers like working on it.
I mean, that's
the
funny thing. It's not legions. It's just a handful of incredibly capable people, and I am constantly blown away. There was just a few weeks ago, I had another idea. I was like, well, what if we added this to what we're doing? And it was a totally new idea. It was outside of the scope. It wasn't anything that we had discussed previously. I'd just been kind of tinkering around with a build and thought, well, what if we could do this? And I mentioned it to Jeremy, our lead engineer, and he's like, oh yeah, I think I could do that. And then like 3 days later, it's fully functioning. It's like, wow. He's like a magician. Yeah. It's not always like 3 days, but you know, every now and then you come up with an idea that just winds up being extremely doable.
Feels like the attitude of that team is like really great. I mean, I guess this maybe not interested for the audience, we could move on, but it feels like the attitude of that team is like really incredible, because like I've worked with other companies, and when you give their developers something, like their first reaction is like, that's stupid, this isn't going to work, that's going to be hard. And like your developers are like, yeah, let's do it, and like they just get it done like nothing. It's incredible.
It's really a fantastic atmosphere. We have a really great tight-knit team, I think.
So cool. Thanks for indulging me, Nick. You could get back with like the questions that are like pertinent that more people will care about.
I thought those were some great questions, I thought, and there are two questions from the chat that I wanted to address first. One is from Eric Nate, which is particular GPU accelerated, and can it use ray tracing or DLSS?
So first part, yes, it is GPU accelerated. There's you can find it in the render settings. It does default to CPU, but there are a couple of GPU options, direct and streaming. Ray tracing, no. Yeah, what was the DLSS? I'm not familiar.
DLSS is the next question. I'm not familiar with that as well.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
that's why I passed the question to you.
Yeah,
I would say no. Part.
I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure. So probably not.
There was also a great question earlier from Drake, which is, I'll take kind of the start of this, but this was kind of how would you go about using Trapcode and Red Giant to create effects similar to a plugin called Nodes that does a very specific thing very well, which is replicates text, just to let everyone know, geometry and kind of forms connections all together, along with provides oscillation animation or animation without the need to keyframe. If you were to go about trying to create that in After Effects with a Trapcode plugin, my offering is I would start with form and start to utilize different ways of mapping 3D object or geometry. So there's one way where you can have one design system as points, one as edges, and then sort of combine those two together. And I think that there might be some cool things that you can do by like referencing a piece of text as an element that you then replicate across a given object. And there might be some uses of it there, although I haven't experimented as much as I used to, but that's an idea. In terms of like feeding like pictures to Trapcode particular, because it does that as well, I'm not exactly sure, but I would probably use some of After Effects' built-in section to achieve that. I was curious, Nate, have you heard of that as well, and just how you might be able to utilize some of the things that Nodes does in Trapcode Suite? And the reason, sorry, I mentioned Form was because I think Form has some amazing built-in animation techniques that don't involve the need to keyframe. And like that oscillation or those terms that you're familiar with in After Effects are inside of Form as well. So it's kind of cool, except it's you're using a fractal field, so to speak, in order to achieve that type of animation.
Yeah, I've used Nodes. I think Nodes is really cool. I think it would depend on the project and what we're kind of do, which is again like the most annoying answer when you ask somebody a question. But like you'd have to like look at like the needs of like whatever this project is that you're doing, and there might be a feature in Mir using like the fractal displacement, or you know in DAO using the the repeater there and like that whole system and all that kind of stuff. So it all depends on like exactly what you're trying to replicate, because they do have different kind of like paradigms, different ways of seeing the world, the Trapcode Suite and nodes.
Yeah, I would say you pretty much nailed it on the head. That would be my initial inclination, would be form or mirror, using wireframe with mirror, using the fractal field for deformation. Yeah, that's where I would start exploring first.
Cool. And I know, Drake, you had a follow-up question, Trapcode or Cinema 4D. This is just a personal answer. I would kind of stick with an After Effects, and the only reason is just because you want some of that functionality of working with flat graphics as well, that I think would tend itself well. However, I do think that inside of Cinema 4D, there's the ability to use some of the replicating functions that might serve you well as two, if the design that you're going for is going to be of a 3D object, and you want that sort of base look. And then to bring in some of that geometry into After Effects with object buffers, and then utilizing Trapcode form to build in the flat graphics, so to speak. Yeah. Cool. And that I think leads into a really great question, which is, when we're looking at particular today, like Nate, how do you consider particular compared to Trapcode form?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that comes up a lot. Oddly, form is I think very underutilized.
Yes.
A lot of people always reach for particular and then try to make particular do what form does natively. We find this a lot in our training sessions, that when Simon gives demonstrations of what form can do, people are like, wait, this has been sitting here this whole time? That would make my life so much easier. I could skip like 8 steps.
Yes.
So, I mean, yeah, obviously there are a ton of similarities between the two products, and they've, since the introduction of form, they've kind of been raised together. And, when we introduced fluids, we gave it to both of them. So there's a lot of parity, but then they, of course, both have their own strengths and things that they're each best suited for. But sometimes there is that question of which one do I reach for this type of project? What is going to get me to this result quicker, when you're looking at that overlap between the two? So that's always the question.
Yeah, very cool. And I think the form's a little underutilized too. And we have Chad here too, and like, you've done so much work in form. I mean, with the training series, was it Form 3 that you did that for at the time?
Geez,
Yeah,
I don't even remember the version number.
It was.
Oh,
I remember.
I think it was Form 3, and I mean, even when you look at some of the stills for our hands-on course, like, you were utilizing form for some of those graphics that are showcased, I think, and they look awesome, man. So
thanks.
I'm curious your take on this too, like in your Trapcode arsenal, like, what's is form or particular your go-to most of the time?
I think form is like honestly my favorite After Effects effect, period. Like that and fractal noise are like the two effects that I use like most often, and like my go-to, like if I have an issue, that's the first place I'm going to go, and the things I become most familiar with. And like when you're a trainer, it's kind of an interesting thing, because like the tools, and so then you get asked to teach them, but then like when you teach them, you kind of have to do like a little bit of extra work to like know the nooks and crannies. Like a regular artist, like you just know what you need to make beautiful stuff and then you move on. But like when you're teaching, you have to get to know all the little things. And so then I knew form, like as an artist. And so then I would teach it, I would learn more to teach it. And as I learned more to teach it, I'm like, oh my dear heavens, this effect is unbelievable. Why aren't more people talking about this? And so like I feel like a champion of Trapcode form. And so like it melts my heart to hear you say that like it's underutilized, because it's like, yes, I've been saying this for so long. Form is just so great.
And even to add to this, I think there's a pretty awesome feature that was just added in particular, which is the velocity over life graph. And it's, you know, like you would have, let's say that you select an OBJ library from the designer, which I'll be showing on my system. And all of a sudden what happens is there's 360-degree emission from that geometry. So you really don't get a sense for what it does. But in that last release, you can control the velocity over life graph to start at a very low velocity and then ramp its way up. So you get an idea of what that model would look like stagnant. But in form, you click the geometry, it's there, and then you can like manipulate it. And it's like so much easier to kind of, to me, in some ways, at least visualize the OBJ geometry. So that's one thing that I kind of like. And if you need it stagnant on the screen to appear like as a graphic, that's the other thing it lends itself well to. And it's just great that we all love form so much when we're teaching particular today.
Well, I feel like so many people, like when I'm teaching people, I feel like 30% of particular users, like 30% of the time people spend in particular, they're just trying to get it to do what form already does. And so like, yeah, talking about form in a particular conversation feels very helpful, I think.
Yeah, and you know, to add to this, because the one thing that it took me a while to get used to in Trapcode that I think is one of its amazing features is lights, and just like what you can do with lights and light paths, and then connecting that to Cinema 4D, and even connecting that to geometry, and what you can do with that movement, especially if you control it with keyframes or expressions. So on adding to that, it was interesting, at least I'm trying to go back to my thought process when I was first like learning particular, but light wasn't like the first thing that I went to as in like wanting to have something from a mission. It was like a box or a sphere. But then when I selected light, and then it was like, oh, this is okay. But then when I started to move that light, I'm like, whoa, this is amazing. Like what you can do when you have control of your movement, or even take a light and wrap it around like a simple circle path in After Effects, or a helix from Cinema 4D. And you know, that I think leads to another question. Like, can you give us a tip, Nate, in terms of one of your favorite tips in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you brought up lights, because one of my favorite tips has to do with motion paths and the new Create Null button. So, you know, for those who don't know, a motion path is where you can take a light in your comp and you animate the path of the light, and then you can emit your particles along that path. And one of the more cumbersome parts of that workflow has always been that you need your emitter position to exactly match the starting position of your light, and you would have to go in and copy and paste the 3 axes for your coordinates. So it was a little bit cumbersome. So now all you have to do you have it all set up there, Nick?
Yeah, do you see? I don't know if you guys see. I'm just inside. I've added particular to a layer, and I'm just going to click on this. This is what you're talking about, the Create Null button, right?
The Create Null button, yeah. So if you want to create a light real quick and just give it a little bit of animation across the screen.
Uh-oh,
So you can
everyone
call
gets to see
name the light motion path 1, and name it motion path so it knows to direct it to that.
Okay, and
just real simple.
Let's do some incredible drawing here with my light. I'm gonna impress Chad right now. Here we go.
I'm impressed.
Are you? Wait, I'm gonna even add a curve for you guys.
Wow. I didn't know this was the advanced course.
I know, this is, I'm just gonna put this down. Very cool. Wait, oh, I won't even break the handles. Oh, I'll break the handles, why not? Okay.
Oh, sure.
There is your path for the light. Hold on, I have to actually just play it, but there we have it over 3 seconds.
Okay, so back in particular, let's see, let's set your velocity to 0 just so we see it traveling along the path easier, and then You want to go down to fast physics.
There we go.
There you go. And there's motion path, and just set it to 1. So now if you scrub, you should see it mimicking that line, but you can see it's not quite matching where you have your light. And that's where the positioning comes into play. So previously you would have to copy all 3 of those coordinate numbers over. So if you go to frame 0 there, and you take your null that you created, and you grab the pick whip, and you hold shift as you pick whip, and pick whip it to the light. There you go. And so now that has snapped your null to the position. So, but you want to go back, and then you want to unparent it once it's in that position. So go back to frame 0.
Gotcha.
And then unparent it, and boom, you're in position.
Ooh.
Awesome.
And let me and while I'm at it, I'm just going to hop into the designer quickly, because I was chatting about the velocity over life, and this is a great potential example to add that to. I'm heading to the motion block, and I was referring to this velocity over life graph in the designer. And here, let's just choose a preset, and I'm just going to reverse that preset. And maybe now start to crank up the velocity over life.
Yeah.
Did I do that? No, I did that the right way. But you'll see at the end of closer to the end of the particle's life stream, that they're now expanding out based on the velocity value. So they start no velocity, and then all of a sudden they reach their peak velocity, which is controlled by this number here. Cool.
Yeah.
That's a great tip. I haven't actually done that myself.
Me too. That's awesome, Nate. Thanks.
Yep.
Cool. And in adding on kind of a tip now, I think just leading towards inspiration before we start with some hands-on stuff, Chad. Nate, what do you find inspiring in terms of seeing people's work with Trapcode particular?
Yeah, I've actually come across a couple of really talented people lately. There's this one guy, Zach, who goes by CG Visuals on YouTube, and he's creating all of these effects with fluid dynamics, and it does like air bending and fire bending and water bending, and he's doing some really outstanding stuff with particular.
I'm gonna log in. I will share everyone this. I'm on his Instagram page right now.
Oh, this is another person that they just tagged Red Giant in their work on Instagram, and our social media manager shared this internally, and I went and looked, and I'm now following them. I'm a big fan of the work that they're doing. They do these kind of surreal alien landscapes and lots of really neat sci-fi stuff using Trapcode.
And I got my links reversed, but here's I think this is what you were talking about in the CG visuals on YouTube. And I'm just going to share that as a link as well if you guys wanted to check out some of the stuff. He even has some of these packs too for
he sells them on Envato called Trapcode Elements. So
awesome.
It's really, really intriguing, yeah.
Well, some long tutorials too, and like realistic water bending. Very cool.
Yeah, it's really neat stuff. I've watched several of his tutorials already.
Cool stuff. And just stopping to show my screen. Nate, I wanted to thank you so much for your time with us, before we get in the hands-on, but I think that you had a really kind of cool, amazing message for everyone too, that I wanted to make sure we shared.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd like to share my email address and just extend an invitation for anyone to give feedback on current features or ideas for future developments. And if anybody is interested in joining our beta community, please hit me up. I think, Nick, you have my email to share?
I do. I can actually pull it up, I think.
It's just n_HAIGHT @maxon.net.
I can type that in myself
Oh,
right
Simon's
now.
got it.
Oh, wait. Oh, thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Simon. Yes,
He'll save us in the
so
background.
please do reach out if you're interested in joining the beta community. We'd be interested in hearing your voices, so we're not just over here developing in a vacuum.
That's so awesome, man. And I
Yep.
think that there was a question that I skipped over from earlier, so let me just try to find it again. There was a question from Robert just about future plans in expanding size over life, opacity over life, and color over life graphs to more detailed control inputting.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that he feels somewhat restricted by the graph.
Yeah, and the graphs are something that we certainly are wanting to put some energy into. Beyond that, I can't speak to any specific plans that we have in development, but that is certainly noted. So thank you for that feedback.
Cool. And Alan had an interesting question just about the pathing, the motion paths, if it works with 3D paths. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that it does. However, I've done some tricks where I've taken or created the null with particular, and then just like for a moment, just turned the null to 2D. And then I used the motion sketch path to draw like an initial motion sketch. And then I turned it back to 3D and then separated it in Z space by just using the J and K keys to move between keyframes in order to then like have your flat motion path with like a motion sketch, which I think does a really good job of that, and then turning it back to 3D.
Yeah, that's an interesting workflow. It will, if you're talking about moving the light in Z space, then yeah, absolutely, it will still follow that path.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the motion path in Z space, yeah, it's going to definitely follow it in lights. For some reason, I thought it was just like the nulls. For some reason, in motion sketch, that's where my brain went.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And Drake had a question about how do you differentiate between different use cases when you're going and creating particular.
Can you expand on that question? Not sure.
Basically, differentiate the explicit use cases for form in particular. Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
How we decide what development we put into particular versus form. Is that? I mean, like as I was saying earlier, a lot of the development has been put into both at the same time when it's appropriate. But then, of course, there are certain things that form does that particular can't, and vice versa. And there might be developments that we want to take in that direction, that where we want to further develop something in particular that just isn't suited to form. I mean, we just let the products tell us what the right path is on that.
Cool. And Drake just added a question, just like how do you differentiate between the two? I think it was just like how do you, but I think you answered that really well in terms of just the two different effects and stuff. And I think, Chad, what do you consider when it with Trapcode Suite? Do you consider all one item in your work, or do you like consider it separate compartments? I was curious your take on this too.
Oh yeah, I think for me, like it's been helpful to kind of like not like, especially form is so versatile. Like I don't treat it like an emergency solution, like, oh crap, now I have to use this thing, so now I got to figure out how to use it. Like I learn the tool, the basics, and so then I could know how to use it when I need it, and I know its versatility, and like, oh, I could just use form for this thing. So for me, just kind of like being familiar with form has like really helped to know which case would use it, because there's a lot of stuff that's like that doesn't seem like a particle situation at all. It's just kind of like a design element on the screen or a grid in the background. And like I know form is like the fastest way to create animation and life and complexity or whatever. And also, in case anyone's worried about like the difference between form in particular, like we're going to be getting to that. I actually have like a project that I'm going to be showing that's like here's what particular is, here's what form is, here's what mirror is, because I find that a lot of people who are new to this stuff, especially, like particular just makes sense right off the bat. But things like form and mirror and DAO are like, there's no competition for those things anywhere. They don't exist. There's nothing like them in other places. They're very unique. So sometimes like understanding what they do is not always really easy. So people, I think, gravitate to particular by default just because it makes so much sense and because there's other things that do like similar things. It spits out particles, but those other tools are quirky and original, which is what makes them so magical to me, I guess.
Chad, do you have that? Why don't you bring up that graphic now?
I can do that. I didn't want to like interrupt Nate. I didn't like.
No, you're doing great.
No,
Okay.
I was thinking this is like a perfect time to kind of do that in that expansion. Let me
Okay.
I'm gonna find you from this large list and make you presenter.
Woo. Let's see here. I clicked the show my screen thing, and so now we're waiting. Oh, something's happening.
I'm seeing something.
Yeah, something moved. Are you seeing my After Effects?
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. So here is, there we go. So basically, you know, we've talked about particular and like what particular is this particle system, right? And I know this is kind of a review, but just I'm going somewhere to bear with me for a second. So we have an emitter, it spits out a bunch of particles, and like most particle systems in particular, the particles have a lifespan. They are born, they have a lifespan, and then they die at the end. And we're familiar with like this system. This is kind of like the stuff we've been primarily talking about. But with form, the particles don't have a lifespan. They're just there. And because they're just there and they never die and they just exist, you can do all kinds of crazy things with them. So that's why we talked about Trapcode Form last month in the sessions on creating user interface elements, because like you can make a bunch of doohickeys and grids and whatever with Trapcode Form, and you can displace them with these like weird turbulence fields. So you can create this kind of effect that you wouldn't be able to create with particular, because in particular that it's more transitory. The particles come on, they die, they leave. But with form, because they just stay there, that we can displace them with weird things. We could displace them with audio. We can, you know, do a bunch of stuff like that. Now, this is a really common look for form, to take these particles and kind of displace them in the add mode and kind of create these sheets. So then they decided, well, since people are using that and creating these sheets, which actually is the, you know, in order to create this, you have to create tons and tons of particles. They said, well, let's make mirror, which actually is not a set of particles. It's like a 3D mesh tool. So you can create very similar looks with mirror, but instead of like a million little particles, you're actually generating like a 2D like fabric in mirror that can move in 3-dimensional space. So there's tons of power between all these three things. And so if you're aware of like the core of what they do, then when a task comes in, you can be like, oh, well, yeah, I need the particles to like shoot out and die, that particular is perfect, or I need the particles just to live there, or I need like a grid of something, then form is perfect. Or if you need like a sheet, a ribbon of something, then like mirror is your thing or whatever. So that's essentially in a nutshell, like the basics of the difference between, like I said, you know, quick and dirty Trapcode comparisons between particular form and mirror.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Is this file actually included in the exercises, Chad?
I thought it was, but then I opened it this morning and like I had a hard drive that was offline and I'm like not seeing it. So maybe it's not there. I could probably put it online, but it's kind of more like a slide.
A slide than anything. Okay.
Maybe it helps.
Cool.
I can pass it along if needed.
Cool. Nate, I just wanted to thank you again so much for your time and shedding some light on Trapcode particular and form, and yeah, just spending some time with us. That's awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. I almost didn't recognize you without the fire in your hair, but I'm glad you got that situation taken care of.
Cleared up. Yeah, fire extinguishers everywhere now.
That's great.
Awesome, Ben. I'm going to start. Let's start with some hands-on stuff. What do you guys think?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Amazing. So hopefully you guys have those links mentioned earlier in terms of accessing the exercise files. So you can see that included in the chat from earlier. You want to grab those now if you haven't done so already, the Dropbox that's shared. And hopefully you guys are in After Effects. And I'll start. We'll take a look or a bit of a tour of some of the stuff that's built inside of After Effects, and just keep some things in mind before we hop into particular. So everyone sees my screen okay?
I do.
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. Let me just check the chat, the questions. I'm going to hopefully take that as a yes. Okay. I've always been kind of curious through my study of particles how particular differentiates itself when it comes to the particle systems that are built inside of After Effects. And so what's available to you inside of After Effects. And I think it's also good to know, as in there might be some situations where for some reason that you're on an After Effects system and that you don't have access to particular. So what can you do with certain After Effects particles, and how do they differentiate from working in particular? So let me hop inside the particle world and CC start composition. So if you've downloaded the exercise files, one folder is my folder, week 1 Nick. And if you double click the AEP file, you'll open that in After Effects. Inside that project happens to be a series of compositions, and the ones that we'll be looking at, which are very basic, happen to be marked with a green tag. So you just want to open up Particle World and CC Particles Start. So what I'm going to do with a solid here inside this project is head over to the Effects menu and hopefully now see a bunch of things lit up. Under that, I'm going to head to the Simulations category, which is where we can access a ton of these particle systems. So, and what I'd like to do is take a look at CC particle systems first. Chad, have you used this in your work?
Honestly, like a few times I've used it, but I try to avoid it whenever possible. Foam and shatter were my go-to particle systems before running into the Trapcode Suite.
Cool. Let's just take a look at some of the different values here in terms of properties. And I've actually, same thing here, man. I've used this really seldom in terms of not a lot of particle simulations, but it was fun to sort of explore, okay, well, how does the system work, and what are the things that are good about it, and what are the things that aren't so good about it? So right now we have like a series of particles basically being born from a point here on the screen. And the point, right, is actually defined by a radius value, where you can see under the producer section of effect controls that the radius is 3 and 3. If we expanded this radius, all of a sudden you get like a different shape for your emitter. Now, how this differentiates in my mind, I'm going to undo those steps. From the default particular system is that there happens to be a physical force that is applied to these particles right away. In fact, 2 physical forces. One is there's a little bit of velocity that is causing these particles to rise up on the screen. And then there's another physical force, which happens to be gravity, causing these particles to fall down. By default, over their lifespan of whatever you've decided in terms of their longevity, I'm going to make this a really small value, like 0.2, so we can get a better sense of this. They're going to change color based on the birth and death color. So that's what those particles do. And the reason I mentioned particle systems too is that it is a pretty fast particle system if you need a go-to of creating a very simple simulation. And if we take a look at the number associated with it, meaning it's 32 bits, so it does work in full color, which is great as well. The limitation to this really happens to be with any type of 3D when it comes to this particle system. So for 3D, if you want to have any type of camera interaction, you're going to want to go to CC Particle World and outside CC particle systems. However, this does offer like a few different types of particle types for your emission. And in fact, if you choose, I believe it's this one, it could be the other system, that you can actually also choose a reference of your own. It might be in Particle World where we can actually choose your own particle system or shape layer to be born from whatever you're emitting from. Now, in terms of getting any control of this particle system, this really comes down to the physics section, where if you zero out the velocity, the particles shooting up, and the gravity, the particles shooting down, everything's going to be in one system based on in one part based on the radius here in the producer field. And again, just to bring this home, if I add a camera to the scene and we try to take that camera, in fact, let me, with that camera selected, also just add a orbit null. You'll notice that there's no 3D. And even if I made this system 3D, it's flat as a pancake. So while it's 32-bit and fast, you can only use this for 2D animations. I would say the same thing about CC Particle World. The difference with this and then CC Particle World is that with World, you get a bit of 3D with it. So in fact, you can have it interact with your camera. However, it's not necessarily going to interact with layers in your After Effects space or world space. If I remove particle systems and we head over here to simulations, particle world is what we're going to find. In fact, I'm just going to make this not 3D. This should, in fact, if now you can see when I move the camera around or the orbit null, these particles do respond to the 3D camera. However, particle world is only 16-bit, I believe. And the other limitation is it's not going to interact with your 3D layers that are inside your composition. Now you do have options to have like particles bounce off a floor and some control over those floor layers. And again, if I hop into this particle system, the other thing to look at is the particle type, where in this instance, I'm actually going to just choose a textured square from the particle section and show that there happens to be a texture section where you can reference an After Effects layer. So I'll choose this info section. And by the way, if you're wondering why you have these on-screen controls that show up, that has to do with the grids and guides category at the top, where you can choose to turn off the position, radius, motion path, and you get this grid built in that you can view to have a sense of your world. And while it might not show right now that these are in fact a shape layer, I use this info sign. They are indeed this info sign, just really small. And again, just living and dying. I'm on an iMac Pro, and I just want everyone to sort of see my current state of playback with this custom graphic. So I'm not getting
like
as much of
a great commercial for particular. It's like horrifying to like watch. Like we used to use these tools, and like, oh dear.
Yeah, and granted, I would say that there are some other systems that can do some pretty complex stuff in After Effects. One that I played around with a little bit, Chad. Hold on, let me go to the simulation. I have to remember the name. It's called Particle World. Have you used this?
No.
It does like a pretty, like a few complicated different types of controls of like oscillating your particle systems, but it's like really slow. So it's not GPU accelerated at all, and is an even bigger lag on the system than what we're looking at now. I do want to add, like, I think that under the simulation category, the biggest strength of After Effects happens to be with some of the standalones, like you mentioned, like Shatter. Another big favorite of mine happens to be, if we headed into this section and took a look at Foam, does a pretty great job. And then there's an explode-based particle system. Oh, it's like CC Snowfall.
Oh.
Have you seen this? Is it CC Snowfall? Hold on. Oh no, it's
exploding
Starburst.
one
That's
is...
what I mean. It's Starburst. So if we actually hop into a new composition, which is the Bubble Starburst and Hair Start. I know a few people joined late. Jay, Ivy, you were saying that you don't have access to the link, so let me share that with you again. If you head to the Maxon events page, you'd be able to click on this event, and there's an access to a Dropbox folder. I'm going to try to just repaste what I have here in the chat. In fact, let me just bring up my web page and go here for anyone who's come in late and wants access to those exercise files. Okay. Yeah, so not Snowfall, it's actually Starburst. I kind of love this. So just notice, Chad, here I have like a bell, and it's a shape layer. And if I add Starburst, it basically takes this object and explodes it into like a star-based system. I thought that was kind of cool because it also puts that, like basically the elements of that shape layer into motion in space. It does it like right away. So this could be kind of used as a nice pseudo 2D effect for when you need it. I've used this a couple times. I call it like Starburst, or your explode layer. So you get some automatic movement right there with Starburst, which is kind of cool. And this is controlled by the speed value. So those are your particles moving through space, but you can have no speed if you want. All of a sudden you get this kind of star look, and then you have control over the size of the different shapes that you use to burst out your bell layer. So some interesting stuff that you can do like right away, and especially if you don't have particular available. So I kind of love that idea of these standalone effects. And you were saying, Chad, that you were utilizing Shatter, which I also consider kind of like a standalone simulation / particle effect. It does a really good job at shattering stuff.
Yeah, it used to be the only way that you could actually get a three-dimensional object, have a three-dimensional object in After Effects, was to use Shatter and kind of hack it, because it created three-dimensional bricks. And you could light it and stuff. Yeah, that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, so I thought that this is like, if you're looking for something just in After Effects and to get a look without a lot of work, this is something to explore. Then another effect here is CC Hair, where it's going to take an object or layer and add all of these hair strands like directly in After Effects. Obviously, if you are utilizing Cinema 4D, that it's using the hair object there for 3D objects is going to be pretty awesome compared to inside of After Effects. But I found this effect to be kind of unique, and it does have some lighting values that are similar to the materials that you might select for your hair object inside of Cinema 4D, although dumbed down a bit. So now that I've covered like a few of the basics of various offerings in After Effects, like let's just hop into particular. And for that, we can go to the saving particles and block preset start composition. There's really nothing special about this. It's literally a point emitter and trap code already applied for you, just so that we can dive right into the exercise. And here, to me, is one of the biggest strengths of particular, and that is that we are living in a very visual world. And by simply under effect controls, hopping into the designer, we really get to open up the experience of what's possible with a particle emitter, not to mention gain a little bit of speed in working inside the designer, as well as choices in terms of what part of our computer that we use. So in terms of the visual experience, on the left-hand side, on the top left, is a presets gallery. And you should know that we can access that with a shortcut key. In fact, if you press the P key, it opens up the presets. Nate, remind me, is Nate still there? I'm actually just in After Effects, but I know I saw him there. Remind me if I'm correct, but the preset gallery used to be made of 2 tabs. So tab number 1 was single system presets and tab 2 was multi-system presets. That's all now been combined into one. Yes?
Yeah. In the last release, it made more sense to just start combining them, especially when we introduced the emitting from emitters.
Okay, cool. And yeah, I think this is like one of the best places to start with particular because you get to see what's possible by using graphics as your particle reference, and then also using various base emitters as your form of emission. So not to mention just how pretty some of these still frames are. This is one of my favorite, at least presets here, which is this nebula strings. So I'm going to single click that and actually just press P to close out the presets category. And this particular particle system is made of multi-systems. In fact, it's made of 4. Another thing I like about the design of the emitter, besides the visual experience of the presets, is that we can actually see what's currently being utilized on a block in a given system. So everything that's highlighted right now, so this is from emitter type to color, is currently in use. But you'll notice that both shadowlets and simulations are grayed out. In fact, they even give you the word off there. So in trying to dissect how this particle system was created, you could literally come to a block and then take a look at that, the settings of that block here on the right-hand side to get a sense for how this particular part of the system was created. The other thing that we can do on these various systems with this nebula block is solo them out to get a sense for what's doing what. And one way to do that is just to alt-click the eye icon to a given system. So I alt-click the primary system right now, and I'm currently not seeing anything. So let me alt-click system 2 instead. And we can see one form of that emission right now. And also, by clicking on system 2, go through these various blocks to see how these various block categories were manipulated. So I'm just going to option click again for system 3 and system 4, so we can, looks like pretty much system 2 and 4 are making up the majority of this preset. The other thing with the designer, I'm going to unsolo everything by just clicking on the eyes here so we can see the overall design, is the fact that we can have an After Effects camera or a simulation of that After Effects camera inside the designer. So if you're familiar with working with it, we can select that camera and all of a sudden start to rotate around this particle system. Now, I like to say that what you do with the camera here in the designer will not have any influence on the camera that you have in your After Effects composition. So this is sort of like a preview. In fact, if I press C again, I can actually now switch the pan tool of the camera. And then C again, I'm going to be able to dolly in and out of that particle system. But you'll notice that if I zoom out right now, press C to pan that particle system here in the designer, and then hop into After Effects by applying that on the lower right-hand side, we should see that the camera itself, that zoom out, doesn't actually bear fruit on the particle system here inside After Effects. In fact, it's just not going to carry over, so to speak.
It's like the Las Vegas. You know, what happens with the camera and the designer stays with
Stays with the designer. Yes, you can't carry it over to After Effects. And yeah, you'll notice we have to you have to patent that quote, Chad. There, that was awesome.
Yeah. Feel free, Nate. You can use this to the Trapcode team if you want to.
What happened to the designer with the camera stays in the designer with the camera.
Sending that off to marketing now. They'll be all over it.
That's awesome. So yeah, so the camera is just for the designer. You'll see that we didn't actually zoom out here inside of After Effects. If I hop in the designer, the other thing is it's going to now go to how After Effects is viewing it. That view of your world isn't maintained. So just something to note. But it's really cool that you can have this camera tool that you can access. And by the way, I'm playing back here in the designer and utilizing these tools to move around my particle system. So that's one of my favorite tools for navigating with a particle system, but I also want to go back to the presets and get something a little bit more pointy here. Let's actually hop to something explosive. I'll grab these blast sparks, and by single clicking this explosive blast sparks 1, we overwrite the previous system. And since this is an explode behavior with the particle system, the particles only live at the very beginning before they die and fade off. The reason I chose this system, and in fact, let me press the play button to play for the first second. And in fact, I'm going to come down here to the loop duration and change the timing to just 2 seconds. Can I do that here? There we go. So I've just minimized how much of the timeline I'm looking at. And I just want to show you that this is interactive. I might have to just choose another system to do this. But if you move your mouse around, let me try another system to do that. It's probably because it's an explosive behavior. Let's go with, what's a good one for this?
Could get one of the fire ones, or
that's a good idea. Let's go to the fireworks category.
Well, the fireworks, those will be explosive. There's the smoke and fire, or the light and magic has some nice fairy pixie dust things.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Here
got the ghost. Oh yeah, here you go.
So we got these flow strings. That was from the light and magic category. And here you can see as I click with my mouse and actually drag around the screen, I could simulate what this might look like if this point-based particle system was attached to a null or a light. And I think it's really kind of cool to simulate that. Not to mention just, I have a pretty good playback here, right there in the designer. Now, I did make mention when we were looking at some of these presets that if we head, you can control some of the speed of these, how your designer is responding here with particle systems and what it's utilizing from your computer. What I mean by that is I'm going to go to this gear icon and just show that under acceleration, there is your choice between CPU and GPU acceleration, depending on the type of a particle system that you have. Nate, did you want to talk a little bit about when you might want to choose one over the other?
So yeah, GPU is really geared towards processing the visual portion of your setup. So it's really, really helpful when using sprites and whatnot, versus CPU is always going to do the work of calculating the positions of your particles. And so if you have a really heavy particle system, the GPU will help you with the visual portion. CPU is still going to continue to do the position calculation.
Cool. So depending on those graphics that you use, this could be great to try to speed things up in the designer. And then we have those two different modes of GPU rendering as well. One that's a little bit more accurate at the expense of more time, I would describe it as. And then the other one that's less accurate, but is going to give you a little bit of a faster processing.
Yep.
Cool. So I just love this interactivity in the designer. And the last couple of things that I wanted to cover here really have to do with how to utilize it the best. So just added, was this just added, Nate, where you can actually add or mix a system with another system?
It's not new, but we did change the behavior a little bit, where previously you had to hold down the Alt key when clicking a new preset to add it. And now we've changed it so that you can just do a single click to overwrite the entire preset rather than adding it.
Cool. I don't know if anyone saw what I just did there, but here was this preset that I chose first. And the first time I basically selected another system and it overwrote that entire system. In this instance, I can actually Option or Alt click. That's one method that's been there for a while, and it adds itself to the existing particle set of systems. And I'm now able to also have it interact with that system. So this would be great, I guess, with systems or presets that have like maybe one or two components. You could easily mix and match it with something else. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Now, saying that this is useful, or parts of it are useful, we can save this in a number of ways. So you have the option of saving a single system or all of these systems together. To save a single system, you could just, let's say, let me option click the primary system here, and you can click on the arrow next to it, and this is going to save this solo system as a preset, right? So you'll just get this part of the particle system. The other option, let me unsolo that, is to save all of the components of this system. So the mix and matching, and just to make this even more worthwhile, I'm going to remove the color block, which is from the system 3 that I added. And I just deleted it by clicking on the trash can on the top left-hand corner. And what you'll see happened is it absorbed the color from system 2. Just going to solo that so you can see it. But it has the color of that system, and now they're connected. With this, I'm going to click on the little Save Multiple System Presets. Chad, what's a good name for the system?
I don't. Now that I'm on the spot, I can't think of a single thing.
Jelly
Multiple
Star.
There, thank you.
Joey's car. I love it. And if I typed into the box, it would have actually accepted my name. And now that that's saved as a multi-system preset, a couple things. One is that if I press P for presets and go back here, I have a custom section at the very bottom. And in that custom section, we should see Joey's car. The next part that I do love about this with custom presets or just your regular presets is the fact that you can control or right click them and choose to show them in the Finder. So now for anyone here who has Trapcode and is looking to share it with someone else, you can take this Joey's car here, the XBXS file, and share it with someone else on another system, which is really handy just to hop in there, show where it is on in your Finder or your Explorer, and then share it with someone else who needs access to it. Now, the next part of saving happens to be my favorite, and I think something that's underutilized in the designer. So you have the option of saving single and multi-system presets. But what about all those like building blocks that make up a particle system? So for this, I'm going to click on the reset button on the bottom left-hand corner. And hello, lovely point emitter. Welcome. I'm just interacting with it right here. What I'm going to do is actually just go to the color block. And in After Effects, you may have selected a particle system and maybe you hopped inside to set a color to random from gradient. And from that, you went to this preset section and chose one of these lovely presets. In the designer instead, what you can do is actually press B for blocks. And because I'm on the color block, I get all of these gradient blocks to choose from. In fact, some of these are branded based on clients that I've done work for. For my mood right now, I'm going to choose Tulip. And you'll see that that block or block preset has been applied. And I think that sometimes the building blocks of your particle system can be equally as powerful to save as the entire system itself. Because when do you just need to quickly take the color of one system and then apply it to another? I think this could be really beneficial to your work. So with that, you could, of course, take these gradient colors from this point system. And let me just remove a few of these gradient stops and then just choose to randomize a color until I see something that I like. And even add a bit of color randomness, not too much. And now I can just save that as a block preset inside the designer. I'm going to call this, what should I call this, Chad?
I think I'm going to defer to Nate on this one.
I don't know. I had my one idea for the day. Autumn Bliss.
Oh, I like it.
See, that's why you're a product manager, dude. That's amazing.
You got to be able to think.
Can we add this as a block preset in the next release? Is that possible?
Send me the file.
Okay, I'm going to send you the file. So this is
All right.
this is great.
Autumn
So
Bliss.
here's
There we
the
go.
Autumn Bliss. You've just seen the birth of a new block preset live. And here's that XBXB file. It's saved in a similar path to the entire multi-system or single system presets. But now you can save that as a block preset. Or share it with someone else. This goes a lot more beyond color these block presets. In fact, like if you're ever looking to explore with like physics, if you head to the simulation section and then just go into blocks, you'll notice tons of presets for flocking, which Nate mentioned earlier, fluid simulations, as well as the great fast physics that you have available too. So definitely explore some of these block presets where you can just take a default point or sphere or box emitter of your choice and then just add a block to see how that might affect your chosen system. TJ was not a tulip. Cool. So that's what I wanted to cover sort of about the introduction to the designer and some of the presets that are in there. The only other thing that I love about this too is that sometimes you might just be curious of what was the default value on a given block. And you should note that if you actually double click the name of a property, that resets it to its default value.
I didn't
So here
know
I just did that to color random. Double click back to 0. I'll double click flocking, and now all of the flocking parameters have been removed, but you can do that on each of the individual values here too. It looks like these are all defaults, maybe not field of view. But yeah, that double click will get you back to square one if you've also made a mess of your particle system and just want to have a starting base. Just double click the name. Cool. Awesome. So Chad, I know you had some stuff, some great stuff to show. So let me hand this over to you too.
Sweet.
All right.
And again, I wouldn't say great, let's manage our expectations, but I have some stuff to share.
Fantastic stuff to show. Maybe I'm not getting the point.
Okay, let me know when you see my screen.
Yep.
I can see it.
Okay, good. So basically, like I like to work in the designer, but I think for teaching, I like to learn in what they call the After Effects UI, basically the effect controls panel. I have this project, the Chat Particles Week 101 project, so you can follow along. But if you hadn't downloaded it, or if you just got here, like you don't need to worry about it really, because basically like we're going to be creating like snowfall and fairy dust and stuff like that. And the only thing that's different is the backgrounds. So you really don't need the project files necessarily for this one. But I'm just going to start from scratch here, so we know there's nothing up my sleeve. I'm going to create a solid. I'm going to apply particular, and then we have like the default setting of particular. It's loading, wait for it. And so what we're going to do is just create from scratch. I find that for me, the best way to learn particles was just to like create different types of particles just from the ground up. And so for a lot of you, this stuff might be review, but if you're new to particles, I think this might help you. So when you first apply, again, we have the point, and let me turn this off really quick. We have the point that's emitting, and then we have these particles that are emitted. For me, I have like a learning disability, and so like it helps me to like kind of categorize things. And so for me, I think of particles, which, you know, they can look really complex and a bunch of crazy stuff going on. Essentially, I divide those up into two categories. You have the emitter, like the thing that's sticking, like shooting out the particles, and then you have the particles themselves. And, you know, there's behavior in there, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but like sometimes it really helps to break down, like there's a thing spitting out the particles, and then there's the particles themselves. And like that usually can help us, like, for me anyways, it helps to kind of like take apart something that I've seen, a particle effect, something in nature, and break it down to be able to recreate it. So again, we have this point sticking out here, and we want to create some snow. This is like the end result that we want to make. And I'm not going to wait for this to render, but if I just kind of scrub through this, you could see, you know, frame by frame, this snow happening or whatever. There's different kind of like chunks, they're in different shapes, and they're all falling at different sizes, and sometimes there's like wind gust, and there's some complexity here, and we might not get to all this right now. You could feel free to take apart this layer in the exercise files and like see what I did, but essentially here's what we want to do. I mean, if we look at this snow, we know what the particles are. It's the snowflakes, right? And the emitter is not like a little point. It's like coming from like the sky. So what we want to do is go to our emitter and start fiddling with our emitter. And instead of emitter type that's a point, so it's just one little tiny point, we want to create a section. So I'm just going to use a box. So now we are emitting these particles from like a box. And you can see now that we just kind of have, you can see that look, that it's different. It's not coming from one point, it's coming from an area. So again, we're not quite to snow yet, but we're getting a little bit closer. Now, by default here, the emitter size X, Y, Z are all linked. So then this box is actually a cube, a 3D cube. And so then if I increase the emitter size, it's increasing the size of the whole cube. And a lot of times that might work, but I find that most of the time what I want to do is come here to emitter size and change this from XYZ linked to XYZ individual, so we have access to X, Y, and Z of the emitter separately. So I'm going to increase the emitter size X to a ridiculous amount, ridiculous amount, ridiculous amount, and then the Y, we don't really need to be like that tall, you know, and because it's gonna be coming from the sky. And then we also want the Z to be big because that's gonna give us our depth. So moving these particles back in Z space. So then I can adjust the position of the emitter and bring that up. And before I get this off screen, which is where I think I want this to end up, we can kind of preview it to see what's happening. So our emitter is kind of shooting things in all different directions. And like, that's not exactly what we're looking for snow. I mean, snow is kind of like forgiving because it is like light and airy, and so it can kind of be a little bit more chaotic, but I'm gonna change the direction from uniform to directional. So we can kind of like point this in a given direction. And I might fiddle with, well, I don't wanna necessarily rotate this. Yeah, I think I'm going to see, where's my directional thing? Am I missing something? Because this is rotating the whole emitter. Okay. Well, I'm going to go down to my environment, and I'm going to increase the gravity. And so then this is going to make these particles, that's way too heavy, maybe like 50. And so now these particles are going to fall. And that's still, again, way too heavy, but we'll just take it to 30 for right now, and we'll be good. And then I could go and now fiddle with the particle itself, because eventually I'm going to, again, raise up this emitter so it's above the screen, but I still kind of want it here so I can see what the particles are doing a little bit more clearly. And let's fiddle with the particles themselves. First thing I'm noticing is that like the particles cut out like right here. And that's because they're dying out. The lifespan is 3 seconds. So I might want to increase the lifespan of the particles. And as you see that, we're getting more particles. And it's not that we're actually increasing the number of particles, we're increasing the lifespan of the particles that are already there, so they're not dying away. So then they last longer on screen. And so we have this kind of effect where they're falling. By the way, a lot of times with particular, you know, like it's a common issue where, you know, the particles are born at frame 1, they're frame 0 at the very beginning. And so, you know, if you want the scene to start with snowfall, then this isn't going to cut it, because you kind of want the snow to already be there. So there's a really cool feature that's helpful in the global controls. It used to be up higher in the emitter section. Now it's down here in the global controls, and it's called pre-run. So this gives you a number of seconds that you can run the particles before frame 0, essentially. So I can run this, like what my lifespan was, what, like almost 7 seconds. So I can, you know, run this for 7 seconds before the start of the frame, so that way the particles are already on screen. And again, that physics simulation is like a little bit too, oops, the environment, the physics are a little bit too heavy. So I might take this down to like, I don't know, 10. So it just kind of lightly drifts. I know that's too light, whatever, you get it. You fiddle with this and get it right. What I'm going to do here is take the size to 5, and I'll leave it there, and then I'm going to increase size random so that we get kind of variations in those snow particles. And then instead of a basic sphere, I can go to the particle type and choose a cloudlet. And I wanted to do this because, you know, there's a great deal of creativity. Like we were talking earlier at the beginning of, like, Nate and I, you know, and we were all talking about how you can get swept up in particular and get like lost, because oftentimes, you know, you have these raw creative tools and you could do interesting things with them. So cloudlets, you know, probably meant for clouds, but as I increase the feather and maybe decrease the opacity a little bit, maybe increase the opacity random, maybe take down the size a little bit more, maybe like 4 or something like that, then we're starting to have this kind of like more organic snowfall. And to that, we can add other effects, like in the physics simulations, we could add some, or no, environment, I could add some wind. So like wind X, and you see as I start moving that, you can see that we have some wind. I could also go to the air turbulence and increase effect position and have this kind of like turbulent noise in the air kind of move the particles around a little bit. So there's definitely a little bit more that we could do here, but you can see that we're starting to create like a snow type effect. Definitely would tweak the physics, definitely increase the emitter so it's like a little bit higher up, but this is like the basics of how you create snow. I'd also want to create, you know, as you start creating a bigger particle system, it starts becoming more obvious where the edges are. So I like to have my particle systems like way, way, way too big. And that way it just kind of creates a bigger sense of depth, a bigger sense to the world, which is pretty cool. but yeah, I love all these controls and all the things you could do to fine tune this and tweak this. Let me really quick before we go to our other example. You'll see these things over life. So size over life, opacity over life, and you see similar things in form. They work a little bit differently there, but you open it up and there's like this little graph. And what this is, like when I was first started learning this stuff, like, I don't know, was it like 14 years ago or something? These little curve things were like so confusing to me or whatever, but here's how this works. These little graphs, like size over life, opacity over life, probably easier to understand in particular than in form, but it's a graph that represents the this property over the lifespan of the particle. And actually, if you're familiar with Cinema 4D and those graphs, then this is probably nothing, but like, so for example, the opacity, it's always at 100%, but I might want it to like start like a little bit faded out and then gradually fade in over time. And then not just automatically pop off, go from 100% opacity to nothing when they die, but I might want them to fade out. And so I can click and drag and draw on this, and you can see that that kind of erodes. So now these particles, you know, they fade in, they fade out. It's a little bit more smooth instead of having particles just like popping on and off. Sometimes you want the popping on and off, but other times you don't. And I could click on smooth a few times and smooth that out. There's also these really handy presets, which is like usually where I start, like this one right here with the bell curve. So it's already a nice, you know, smooth fade in, fade out. Again, I probably want to add a little bit of like life randomness. I also might want to fiddle with the size over life graph, so they get smaller or bigger as they live. But again, there's the basics, and then this is like the already cooked version with like the snowfall, where I took a little bit more time. I didn't make the snow pure white, so I changed the particle color, so it was like a little bit bluish to like kind of like composite a little bit better. But that's that. Another thing I wanted to go over very quickly is this like little fairy dust example. It's like very common to kind of just want like a little like little like that of particles. And so it's kind of like a fun little trick. And I think Nick basically covered this stuff, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But essentially what this is that you're taking an emitter and you're animating the emitter, which is what creates these trails. And I think I just used just like the position keyframes, which is not the best way to do this. Like we talked about earlier, it's typically best to parent this to a null or a light, so you can move in 3D space, and it's a little bit more like, I mean, you can move in 3D space here, I guess, but it's a little bit more flexible with a null or a light. So let's look at how to do this. Basically, I'm going to go into particular, and again, we're starting with this basic deal here, and I'm going to go into my point emitter, and I'm going to adjust the X rotation. Oh, wait, no. Now I'll go to direction here. Now I'll adjust the X rotation. And if I take this to 90 degrees, you can see that really what's happening is when you first apply particular, there's a point emitter and it's shooting directly at the camera. So that's why it seems like there's kind of whatever, but actually what's happening is this, where it's, you know, shooting particles directly at you. And that's fine for right now, I guess. But what I can do here is, again, very quickly, I'm just going to click a position and then like move it and then move it. And that's what kind of creates these cool little trails here. And then all I did, again, what you want to fiddle with the emitter and also the particles. So we have, you know, something similar to what I had before in terms of the emitter, like how the particles are being spit out, but the particles don't look the same. So that if we close up the emitter, we'll go into the particle section, and then these are on too long, like the trail's too long. So I'm going to change this to like, I don't know, 0.5 maybe. That's a little bit too short. 0.7, and then we could give a little bit of randomness for the life. So some, they disappear at different times. Maybe we could randomize the size there. And another thing I want to do is change the particle type to a star, which kind of creates this look. Maybe randomize the size a little bit more, take down the size to like 3. And let me change the color to something more like starry. And I can increase the color randomness a little bit to get a little bit more variation in those particle colors. I also want to change the way they're interacting because they're sparkles. So I'm going to change the blend mode to add. And now we have these kind of cool sparkles. I will say just very quickly, a couple other things. Opacity over life. If we use this preset with a little little spikes in it, if you think about it, like it's the opacity, like we talked about, they start full opacity and they gradually fade out. But there are times when they kind of hit full opacity in the middle of nowhere, just randomly. So they will be fading out and then pop back on to full opacity and then pop back out. And that creates this kind of like sparkly trail look. So you see this kind of like, hopefully with the rendering of the webinar, you can see that, but it's kind of like the ones at the trail before they die out, they kind of like sparkle a little bit, which is really cool. Now, one quick thing here, again, it's about emitters and particles. So if we wanted to turn this, and I'll just go to my final example, if we wanted to turn this, for example, into like a smoke trail, the physics, the emitter, is kind of similar. It's already in the ballpark, but we just need to change the particle itself. So this is why particles are so fun and flexible, because you could just change like a few settings and then have a lot more power. So I'll go into the particle section, and instead of a star, I'll use a cloudlet, and that doesn't look great initially, but I might increase the size of these. And this is generally my like go-to formula for creating smoky stuff, is that you want to make really big size and really low opacity. I mean, it's generic and you got to do case by case basis, but like that's generally where I start. So huge clouds, way too big, right? And actually I might take the blend mode to like normal. And already we're getting something that's like, fairly smoky. But as I take down the opacity, then we start having, little pieces show underneath or whatever. We could even like randomize the opacity a little bit if we wanted to. And so then we have this really beautiful smoke trail. And so what we probably want to do is go in with the curves with the opacity and have it fade on, because like right now it's like feeling very poppy because the opacity random or the opacity over life is doing this weird spiky stuff that looked good with the sparkles, but not good for this kind of like smoothness. So maybe like here. And so now we have this kind of like smoky trail, and we really didn't do anything to change the emitter or the physics or anything like that. We just changed the particle and what it is, but then we have a completely different result, which is really cool. And of course, in particular, we have multiple systems, so we could add 16 systems. So we could have the sparkles and the smoke going at the same time, plus other things, So very cool. And really quick, before I turn it back over to Nick, in case anybody's interested in the visual effects aspect of particles, I'm in the Visual Effects Society, and tonight we're like hosting this event. It's called a Creative Spotlight. It's a free event. If you're interested, it's an online thing, 7 p.m. Pacific. It's an interview with Mike Chambers, who is the visual effects producer for most of Christopher Nolan's movies. So he's like nominated for like Academy Awards, stuff like that, for like Inception, and he did the visual effects for like Tenet and stuff like that. So it's a free thing. So if you're interested in like learning more about like really high end visual effects, then that's going to be tonight. The link's on my website, chadperkins.net, and then there's the stuff for free thing, and then there's like the thing to register, so you get the like. Anyways, thanks all, and Nick, I'll turn it back over to you, or you can steal it from me. I don't know how that.
We can
try both.
Let me just take. Let me take. So you said 7 p.m. Pacific tonight, right?
7 p.m. Pacific, yes.
Pacific. Okay.
Yes.
Very cool. How did you guys?
7 hours from now, basically.
7 hours from now. I don't know if I'll be in bed, but if I'm not in bed, I am there. I'm very curious about that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
How did you guys find today? And really curious. I hope that everyone learned something. Feel free to write that in the chat. We're very excited to kind of continue along with this for like another 5 weeks. And for any reason that you were feeling that the hands-on segment was a little bit not as much as you were expecting, don't worry. Next week we are in for starting of a wild ride. So yeah, we have quite a bit of stuff to cover next week. Chad, do you want to talk about some of the stuff?
I don't even remember. Is it lights next week? Is that the thing that we're doing?
We're we're doing a little bit of 3D and lights, I believe.
Yeah. So part of the magic of these particles is lighting them and having them be influenced by like 3D objects, and also too for compositing them into shots. That's like really important. But there's just a whole bunch of stuff that you can do, which is one of the cool things about Trapcode, because the After Effects, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Nate, but like the tools that Adobe gives you to work with as far as like what you can get effects to do in After Effects has been traditionally pretty limited. And so like the using a light as an emitter is almost like a hack, because you didn't have the ability to create like 3D controls and things like that in effects in the beginning.
Yeah, a lot of the capabilities have evolved from when Particular was first introduced. What that's like, if you remember a couple versions ago, the emitter position was broken up into X, Y, and then down below you had Z position as a completely separate control, and that was a holdover from the early days where there was no 3D, there was no 2.5D in After Effects. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how the tools have been able to evolve as the host application has evolved.
Awesome.
I'm just typing away. Also, I'm not ignoring you guys, by the way. I promise. What I was going to do is just actually share in the chat to everybody the link again for the YouTube page where this training, you can watch it again. And for any reason, if we went over something too fast, you can watch this on record. It's unlisted. And then don't forget to check out that event page on Maxon. And here is the link again to those exercise files that you can access. Every Tuesday, Chad and I plan to put up new exercises for the week. So if you're tuning in next week for our little talk on 3D as well as lights, you can download the project files here starting Tuesday, 5 p.m. End of day, Eastern, that is. But yeah, Nate, thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks,
I can't see you because I have my full screen full, so I just want to make sure I saw everyone again. But thanks so much again.
I'm not sticking my tongue out at you, I promise.
Yeah. Just like thumbs down from both Chad and Nate. And no, Chad, thanks so much for doing this too. This is awesome. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, but
Nate, it was
thanks everyone
too. That was really cool. Sorry.
Totally. No, this is awesome, and we hope to see you guys next week, and can't wait to continue with our exploration of particles.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.